So what it comes down to is human factors and the way that we place human and machine teaming together to create a better solution and put safeguards into that. Now, you could ask me, so just putting a human in between the AI and the client, is that enough? And the answer is no. You have to have the right people doing that with the right processes, the right training, and understand what they have to do in that scenario.
Okay, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to another segment on Conversations on Retail Risk Mitigation Asset Protection broadcast. You guys know me, Brand Elverston, 12-year Army Field Artillery Officer veteran, 22 years at Walmart Corporate. And we are here today with what I consider the industry leader and the gold standard on active shooter software as a solution detection. I've been affiliated with ZeroEyes for 4 or 5 years now from a practitioner standpoint. And we are here today, really, guys. And JT, we talked about our listener base across the globe, a lot of DoD, but also civilians. And we've all seen the media hype that's out there with computer vision, AI. A lot of companies are, in my mind, my estimation, over-indexing on capabilities, getting ahead of themselves more in the AI space. Doug McMillon, CEO of Walmart, just recently, in a more measured response, stating a pause on hiring for the next 3 years until they figure it out, but he too is in the camp. We really don't know the potential of AI broadly yet, so we're going to integrate it into our workforce and see what it can do. So ZeroEyes, in my estimation, the industry leader in this space. Active shooter scenarios, as we all know, they happen all the time. In fact, there are hundreds that we don't even hear about anymore. We've become tone deaf to the risks, largely in schools. The most significant one in recent years, and JT checked me on the year, was the one at Walmart and El Paso. And I believe there were 29 fatalities. And in that instance, again, correct me if I'm wrong, JT, but the shooter dwelled for several minutes under clear view of a camera in the parking lot. So we're going to talk through about, again, we're not going to, make any proclamations, but had there been this solution on those cameras, what could have happened differently? So I'm going to introduce JT, or he's going to introduce himself. I always like to brag on the fact that ZeroEyes is founded by former Navy SEALs and veterans. It is led by former Navy SEALs and veterans, and it is staffed by former Navy SEALs and veterans. I always get in trouble, JT, on Marines. They get all wrapped around the axle on former versus veteran, whatever the hell the proper term is for people that have been SEALs and now are civilians. What is the proper term?
I think we're once a Marine, always a Marine.
There you go.
I always just call it, maybe not as lean, not as mean, but still a Marine.
That's awesome. Okay, let's go with that. That sounds great. So give us your background, JT, and kind of what you do at ZeroEyes today.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm the head of sales at ZeroEyes. I've been with the company for 4.5 years now. I joined back in August of 2021 following our Series A venture capital raise. I was in the first 30 employees in the company. So I've really watched it grow from, a handful of employees up to where we're at today, well over 200 and growing across the entire United States as well as internationally. My background came out of the Marine Corps. I joined right out of high school. I ended up doing a medical out in 2020. I went from 2006 to 2020. So just under 15 years, left as a Marine gunnery sergeant. My job in the Marine Corps, I was an intelligence specialist. So I worked in that space pretty heavily for a long time. About the last half of my career, I served in the Special Operations Forces as a support guy, direct support with a lot of the teams, our nation's most finest warriors, and being able to go downrange with them and do bad things to bad people. After I left the service in 2020, I went into defense tech for a little while, joined a small company, and I happened to run into ZeroEyes while I was out doing federal business development for this company down at Tyndall Air Force Base in Panama City, Florida. Fell in love with the mission almost immediately, knew I needed to join. I saw the problem set here in America. I had school age kids that are in school every single day. And I knew that this problem was not going away. And if there was some way that I could contribute to help stop or at least mitigate the impacts of gun-related violence in schools, I wanted to be a part of it. So I was knocking down the door. I waited, over 6 months to join after the Series A, was raised and at the Capitol to bring me on board. And been here ever since. Don't plan on going anywhere.
Yeah, I the last time I was up there, and I always talk to the friends of mine that it's almost like being back on active duty. It's an awesome experience up there. And people that know me largely are listeners, allergic to bullshit. And, the less PowerPoint, the better, and just state the mission and execute. And for the listeners that may not fully be aware of ZeroEyes, it's very much that fabric of execution and intensity and laser focus on purpose. And that is, while JT, it may be intuitive to you, in my career span, Walmart corporate and several others, that's not always the case. Oftentimes, it's more of an exercise of herding cats and trying to stay focused on 14 different missions than one. One of my parting conversations with my then boss at Walmart was, he asked me the biggest difference between my 12 years active and 22 at Walmart. And I said, it's simple. In the military, we always knew how to define critical versus important versus routine. There was never any confusion on what was critical for me as a field artillery officer: safe and accurate nuclear operations, and to be followed by conventional munitions. Everything else was important. Civilians struggle with that. I struggled with that in my 22 years of being able to understand what is critical. So let's kind of scale back and talk, JT, if you would, about the journey. We had ZeroEyes on last, probably at the tail end of COVID, on the journey, really, of the founding, the principle, how in the world a bunch of badass Navy SEALs decide to do the final salute and create this. Walk us through that, because it's been a while, on how this came to be.
Yeah, absolutely. So the company was founded back in 2018 following the Parkland shooting. Our founders, 4 former Navy SEALs, 1 world-class technologist, got together. They saw the problem that was happening in America. The SEAL founders had worked together in the teams. Our CTO at the time, Tim Sulzer, Mike, our CEO, and Tim had worked together on other projects in the civilian capacity. Then they saw the need here in America after Parkland. When we saw Nicholas Cruz, the shooter in Parkland, with a weapon underneath view of a camera in a stairwell for somewhere in the ballpark of 45 seconds to a minute before he ever stepped out into those hallways and started shooting, that was really the spark for why can't we try to mitigate some of these effects, or at least give time back to first responders by early detection. We've got license plate readers, we've got facial recognition, we have all these different softwares that are out there, things that we're using on the battlefield as warfighters that can be translated well over into the civilian sector to try to keep kids safe and people that are going to their workplace and houses of worship. So shortly after Parkland had happened, Mike or his daughter had began to go through the active shooter drills at her school. She went through her first one, came home pretty upset, told Mike, why are we doing this, Dad? Why is this happening in middle school? Is my school next? Is that why we're doing it? And so a few days later, she'd calmed down. Mike went back to the school for another event. And then as he was walking into the school, noticed that there was cameras kind of spread all over the place. And then ran into the security guard that was on site. And what he found, and after talking to him, is that nobody was watching their cameras. They used them for forensic and evidentiary purposes only. And that was really the catalyst, the spark for ZeroEyes. Like, I think we can do something here. So shortly thereafter, the founders got together. They burnt the ships. They went all in on ZeroEyes. We're quite literally walking around underneath camera with the arsenal of guns that you would expect, a bunch of SEALs to have in their arsenal. In Mike's backyard, had the cops called on him a couple of times because of it. And ZeroEyes was born. And so that's really the true story. Started out of the basement, kind of the same as what you would hear from large organizations that were founded out of garages.
So can you walk us through then, V1, V2, and whatever version we're on now, the iterations to get to the point where you had, to use the business term, the MVP, a viable product? What was that journey?
Yeah. So the team got together, and for like the first 18 months of the growth of ZeroEyes, it was just, we need to collect data. We need to be able to build that. We need to start developing the data set. And so what they found is before ever even going out and videoing underneath camera was, well, let's go on Google and let's go web scrape a ton of images, and let's run our kind of rudimentary algorithm against that and see what we get. And the result of that was a ton of false positives. And there was no way to scale on that because the data was different quality, pixelization was no good, and it really wasn't a true standard in the way that data was set up. So the first step was figuring out, how do we build good data? And what we found is you really just need to do it yourself. And taking a weapon, walking around in view of a camera in all sorts of different carry configurations, and changing even the way that we as former military would hold a weapon. You want to look at the history of mass and active shootings, and the way that these people are carrying their guns is not going to be generally the way that someone trained with a firearm is going to. So you have to change that thought process up by doing that. So those are little things that we had to tweak through the algorithm. After that, we were introduced to a gentleman by the name of Dr. Heilig over at a high school in New Jersey. And he was gracious enough to allow us on nights and weekends to test inside of his facility on his cameras to be able to develop this out. He was the first person to hit the I believe button for this customer, for this company. And from there, we grew out into what we are today. And that was really the kind of the early catalyst for how we got to where we're at. And so those initial early adopters saw the value, saw the need, and they realized, hey, look, this thing's not going to be perfect. It's new, but we need to at least try to do something about it. And those visionaries are what helped us do what we're doing today. And that's mitigating gun violence.
And what year was that when you guys were founded?
So founded in 2018. And we started doing testing in school in around late 2019.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So let's dive into the taboo subject of social media. So, the active shooter events that do happen tragically on an alarmingly regular basis. And, in my mind, it's a uniquely American phenomenon. You don't see this a lot overseas, on occasion in Russia. But, as a practitioner, so I'm going to put my Walmart badge back on, or retail badge back on, is, there, in my mind, there was never an expectation of flawless anything. In my mind, you're setting yourself up for failure if you believe something is indeed flawless. And there's been some conversations online about misidentifications of weapons, first responders alerting supposedly on a bag of Doritos or Cheetos, scaring the hell out of the kids, of course, that are on campus. And I will do the disclaimer, that is not ZeroEyes. That is another element in the player. How does an effective company, and you guys do it really well, how do you prevent those gaps, if you will, or instances where AI or computer vision is not perfect? What layers do you guys have in that will prevent an instance like that?
Yeah, it's a great question, Brand. The way I look at it is I'm a tinkerer myself. I drive a diesel truck and I like to work on it myself. The only time that I find things online where I'm looking up something that, hey, I heard this weird noise, maybe a serpentine belt went out. I'm going to Google that and I'm going to find all sorts of issues about serpentine belts on this truck, right? And there's probably 100 of them out there. Well, there's millions of these trucks that came off the assembly line, right? And so we only generally hear about the problems versus the solutions that these software providers are solving. So I think it's always good to kind of keep that in the back of your mind, as people are always going to get the news stories are always going to pick up on the negatives. But as far as the ZeroEyes difference goes, and the issues that we've seen with other providers out there, and it's really has to do with process. AI is very, very close to with one another. I do think our process and the way that we build the software, it's definitely the best way to do it, and we've seen the result of that in many head-to-head competitions with our competitors that are on the market, where we just deliver a better product in that way. But on the same token, it's all going to catch up with one another over time, because it's all continually getting better. And the billions upon billions of dollars that are being invested in this industry are going to enable that to get closer. So what it comes down to is human factors, and the way that we place human and machine teaming together to create a better solution and put safeguards into that. Now, you could ask me, so just putting a human in between the AI and the client, is that enough? And the answer is no. You have to have the right people doing that with the right processes, the right training, and understand what they have to do in that scenario. We see it all the time with there's remote guarding companies out there that'll say, hey, you punt your stream over to us. We're going to have our monitors watch your video all day long in a different country, making $1 a day. And that's how they have a revenue model, and they have a huge churn because of that. Because what they realize is they can't catch everything. Even if you have an AI enabled, if you don't have the right person that's trained, that knows what they're doing, and you're doing it for the cheapest that you can, you're not providing a great solution. So what we do at ZeroEyes, it's different. One, as you kind of mentioned earlier on, about 75% of our company is former military and law enforcement. So we pluck people from those roles specifically to bring them in here, because they know this problem set. They've lived it themselves. In the ZeroEyes Operations Center, so we have two of them, one in Philadelphia, another one out in Honolulu. They are primarily staffed by former military and law enforcement. Almost everyone that sits in those seats has come from that background. And, even some are like 911 dispatchers. And we've been able to professionalize our communications by learning from those people that sat in those different seats. Everyone that sits in those seats within a year of beginning their tenure in the ZOC has to go get a 911 dispatcher certification, so that they know how to speak, effectively with first responders and give the information that they need in the quickest amount of, or in the most efficient and effective way possible to relay, a potentially threatening situation. And then they get, we go through human performance factors. If you look at today's society, I think, the last thing I saw something, we have the attention span of a goldfish today, somewhere around the ballpark of about 8 seconds, right? Yep. And so you have to factor that into human performance, even if they are former military and law enforcement. Yeah, you can't expect somebody to sit behind a computer screen for 12 hours a day and just stare at it, clicking on, is this a gun or not? Because you're going to fatigue them, you're going to have issues. So we've taken human performance factors into account to think about how long can we have someone do this before they're actually fatigued. And we've gotten that down to a science. We know exactly, person by person, alert load by alert load. We have different times of day where we know we're going to need to staff up, different times of day where we know that we don't need quite as much staff. And so that allows us to flex our staffing model and our performance model based on those different times of day. Now, that doesn't mean that we're not adequately staffed in case we have some random spike, but it just means that we've really looked into this very, very heavily. And then those analysts are tested all the time. So even though we may not be seeing the worst of the worst, true positive, firearm detection, mass shooting type incident unfolding in front of our cameras or in front of the cameras that we're on, these guys are being tested at any point in time to know that they can react properly. And so tying a very high-end algorithm with a very well-trained individual is how we mitigate a lot of the concerns that are out there from some of the more recent events that we've seen, and as well as some other software things that I can get into a little bit later that allow us to look at things a little bit differently.
Yeah, it's funny. When I first discovered you guys, it was on LinkedIn, and I pinged the sales guy at the time. And anyway, quick chat back and forth, and then came up to visit and met with Sam. And I remember, I think differently now. I remember my opening comment. I'm like, look, dude, as a retailer, you can't depend on humans to do anything. You have to figure out how you're going to automate that process of authenticating an incident. And you know Sam better than I do. It wasn't long before I'm like, you know what? I'm completely wrong. That is the competitive advantage, not the disadvantage. The fact that you have the team that you guys do, largely former military or law enforcement first responders, looking at that data to ensure before it's dispatched that in fact it is real. It is an incident or is as real as the human eye can tell with the camera supported. So back to your earlier point on capitalizing on anything bad, the exception data. I face that just about every time I tried to do something in my corporate life of, when you're circulating for capital or this is a new technology or whatever, um, trying to secure capital. And the ones that didn't want to spend it could always find one incident out of tens of thousands sometimes that, well, it's not perfect. It missed this. And we're not talking about human lives. I get that. But more times than not, it was misscanning a particular product on inventory shrinkage or loss. And my answer was always, okay, I know, being a smartass, I know it's not as perfect as what we do today, but are we going to not do something because of one opportunity out of a zillion that we are going to have to step in and improve the solution? It doesn't make sense to do that. So no different than a lot of what you're seeing in the media today with this, the mischaracterization that AI is not reliable, computer vision is not reliable, et cetera, et cetera. As a practitioner and a former retailer, it absolutely is. And the safeguards you guys have in place to ensure that that doesn't happen is what it takes to be reliable and be the industry leader. So let's shift over to the green screen and kind of the mechanics of how you guys do that. Because, if I'm name a retailer, I'm thinking, well, what do? Fly people all over the place and walk around with guns in parking lots of retailers and defense industry, military installations? How do you do that? So talk about what you guys do in that space.
Yeah, well, you'll know this best, right? It's pretty hard to walk into a Walmart with a gun and stand in front of the electronics section, right? And wave a gun around. You get some weird looks, and you're probably going to end up in handcuffs pretty quickly. So we wrote that off very early on. And while doing some work for the Department of Defense early on, we were asked to go out to one of the named operations zones and start collecting data off of one of their systems. And we said, this is a really, really expensive way to go out and do this. And I mean, they were prepared to spend the money. Obviously, the DoD was, but we presented a couple of different options. And we said, look, you probably have a lot of this data already. You've got information already that we can pull. Let us take that environment that we have off of that video and let's parse it into a green screen environment that we can build that capability for you and really reduce the cost of doing that, as well as the accessibility of being able to do that. So back in 2020, we built a Hollywood quality green screen lab just down the street from our headquarters in Conshohocken, Pennsylvania, just outside Philly. Inside of that, it's about 5,000 square feet. We have just about every make and model of camera that's out there on the market today that meets the minimum requirements, on-VIF compatible, your industry standard security cameras. Yeah. So we have at least one of those makes and models in there to be able to test off of. And what we found is by taking, a snapshot of our client data or client, environment, we could put that into the green screen lab, walk around with a gun, and then curate data that acts as if we're actually sitting there. So when you look at something like a casino and the floor that they have in there, the wild looking carpet that's there, it's a really easy way to trip up computer vision algorithm because there's a lot of negative objects, a lot of things that stand out that it has to think about. Is this a gun? And it's not, but it can trip it up a little bit. And so by walking into casino floor or asking one of our clients and say, hey, can you just take a screen grab of your camera that overlooks the casino floor and the gaming floor and send us that, we can overlay that same environment in our green screen lab and then build you a performant data set for that type of environment where we have all these kinds of flashing lights and wild carpet and people walking by with different types of objects all the time. And so that's what allows us to curate data without having to your point, go fly all over the place, be in your parking lots, and disrupt your daily operations.
So that's a pretty sophisticated layer, green screening, 5,000 square feet. So it, would I be out of line by saying you probably have hundreds of millions of images that you've constantly trained the AI modeling? Is that accurate?
Yeah, we have a dedicated team that is all they do 24, all day, every day. They are out there collecting data in that environment as well as other environments for different types of, whether it's a tower camera, it's off of a drone. We've done it off of a robot dog. You sort of name it. Their job is to go and look at, all of the different ways that we would potentially, be able to collect data and then parse that back into the algorithm to make a more performant data set.
Good segue into what other mediums do you guys put the software? If I'm a retailer, I'm like, okay, I have static cameras on the outside, the perimeter, stairwells, whatever. I get that model. Talk to us about some of the cool things you guys are doing with DoD and schools. You just mentioned robots, robot dogs. What are the other use cases and applications?
Yeah, so a lot of it was born out of the Department of Defense, and specifically the Air Force SBIR program, where we went out and we presented and say, hey, we think we can build and solve a problem for the Department of Defense mission set that also has commercial capability. And so that's about being able to tie our algorithm off of a non-traditional sensor, like the 8 cameras that are on the Ghost Robotics robot dog quadruped, to give you 360-degree coverage while that thing goes out and patrols your fence line, or a drone. That's one of the biggest, hottest items we're watching. We have front row seats to what's happening in the Russia-Ukraine conflict and the prevalence of drone warfare and what that's doing. And so if we don't take a look at how are we going to be able to utilize our technology, not only to be ran off of drones, but then also detect them as an additional layer of capability for our clients, it's really, really important that we stay with that. So we're watching that very, very closely alongside of our DoD counterparts. And then lastly, every time you pull into a major retailer, big box store, parking lot, you generally see a tower that has cameras tied to it. And so that's been another big growing point for us, is to be able to operate on those towers, as well as be able to work with the existing power infrastructure to deploy our software where you potentially wouldn't have that coverage already. And so we're working through a lot of those things right now with a number of different clients.
So you guys are want to talk about the silo or the industries you guys are in. So you're in a lot of K through 12. You're in DoD military bases, for the civilians that listen to us that may not be familiar with that vernacular. Some retail. What are those industries you're in, and which one would you say, or if there's a couple that are most heavily penetrated or bigger customer base in those industries, be that DoD, malls, whatever?
Yeah, so we have clients that quite fit in every single vertical imaginable at this point. Tell people, we've got a pre-K client with 2 cameras, Fortune 10 financial services firm on Wall Street with thousands. And so that's really the breadth and depth of people that are seeing the value in this software. We were started to try to stop or mitigate the K through 12, kids being shot in school. That's what we wanted to. That's why we were founded. What we quickly found is that there's a desire for that outside of those environments. When we look at, to your point, the 2019 El Paso Walmart shooting, or the Tops Buffalo grocery store shooting, and there's things that these are happening in all sorts of different locations. And so what we're finding is it's a need because people see the obvious tragic loss of life that comes along with that. But then there's second and third order effects that come with that as well, where you're dealing with the liability and did you do enough? And, thinking about how forward thinking I was. And so those are things that we're finding in the industry that people are thinking about. And so We've had major higher education institutes that have brought us on board in the wake of shootings. That seems to be a very growing space for us. When we saw the tragedy up at 345 Park Avenue in New York back in July, that's very fresh on people's minds that this guy walked through Manhattan with a brandished AR-style rifle, walked right into a high-rise and shot a bunch of people with no early warning. And so, I think everybody woke up to it that said, "Hey, this can happen to me, and it can happen just about anywhere." And so, I'd say across the board, we're seeing growth in almost every vertical that you could think of.
Yeah, it's, aside from the K through 12 challenges, if you will, healthcare. I think about that every time, if I'm ever in a healthcare facility and you guys are in a healthcare facility here in Northwest Arkansas, and I got a tour of all the cameras from the security guy while we were in negotiations and walked through all of it. And what I found most striking was I didn't really appreciate the real risk healthcare workers have with violence. I thought, if you want to think about violence, the wheelhouse of a cashier at Walmart or an exit greeter getting their ass kicked because they tried to stop somebody rolling out 15 TVs. And we had shootings, fatalities, all the years I was in retail. That was not, tragically, it was not an anomaly. It happened. But in the healthcare industry, and, at some point, to your point, you have the consideration of duty of care. And I learned that years ago at Walmart with another measure that we put in place. And then you find the right lawyer that says, well, you were doing that protective measure in that store, and the incident happened in this store and you didn't have it. Therefore, you're more liable. And I'm not a lawyer, not the proper language, but basically, it's like damn if you do and damn if you don't. So, are you seeing any movement in that space of duty of care that enough of these, well, I won't say enough of these technologies are out there, but retailers, I'm going to pick on them, they have choices in technologies. It's available. It's not like that technology doesn't exist. So when you do have the 2019 incident at Walmart and 29 people or 30 people were killed, having been in that seat, that could have is easily tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars total cost, from reputational all the way down to true hard cost of lost sales, insurance premium, et cetera. So if you're a finance guy, you sit back and say, okay, I chose not to use the protective measure, in this case, active shooter software, but I peg it easily at $75 million for one incident. I have 5,000 outlets where this could happen at any time, including a home office campus, et cetera. In the industry, do you see any particular industry more sensitive to duty of care and saying, you know what, I'm going to get in trouble if something happens because this stuff's out there? Or do you see that still people gambling with that and saying, probably won't happen to me? Do you see any bubbling up of duty of care at all?
Yeah, I think it's a mixture of in any vertical, right? And every company is a little bit different on their risk tolerance, and so we've seen a good amount of what that looks like um, from client to client. What I've seen is, especially following the Park Avenue shooting, is property managers are really taking this very serious. We've had an influx into this space of people saying, "Hey, our tenants are asking us about this, and why don't we have this already? And we need to do our diligence into what this looks like." And so we have some of the world's largest that have reached out to us and are in various stages of contracting or evaluation and things like that to look at this, because they're being asked by their clients and saying, "Hey, look, if you don't bring this on board, we're just going to move our operations somewhere else that's going to happen." And we're even here, willing to pay for it if that's the case. So that's been a large space that we've seen just in the last few months grow. Another one that we don't really initially think about, or at least you think it more of from a robbery perspective, but it's financial services. We see a lot of banks looking at this now because unfortunately, as our nation is in various stages of economic stress from different reasons, people typically want a scapegoat, right? And unfortunately, those folks that work in the banking industry are sometimes the scapegoat. And so we've had several major U.S. banking entities that have reached out to really dive deep into what does this look like, not only for our corporate campus, but for our retail locations where your tellers are just 20 feet from the door when you walk in. And how do we protect them? How do we give them early warning? So those are things that are being like kind of the out of the box, maybe not mass shooting perspective, but just gun related violence that we're trying to help solve.
One of the challenge, and this will resonate with probably a lot of people that are going to be listening to this, is the dynamic of great solution, but we can do it internally. And I always, even when I was on a W-2, I'm like, those are the 8 most deadly words you'll hear from finance and the IT guys, because it's bullshit. And I starred in that movie too many times during my W-2 years of we'd bring in third parties that's all they do, like you guys. You're not trying to boil the ocean. You're solving one specific problem and you're damn good at it. And you sit down with the tech guys and they fall in love with it. And then the conversation usually distills to, well, that's something we can do in our whatever tech department. And I never saw that effectively work. The only time that ever effectively worked is if the solve was on the CEO's or senior leadership's radar as a mandate. If it is ancillary, it's risk mitigation. You got people that fall down on the floor and I need to be able to detect water or active shooters or out of stocks or any of those things. Good luck. You would get a fairly accurate copy and a good attempt at doing that. But then you fell victim to, I did, if you did that company's solution. So let's just say somebody copies this. The challenge then becomes when something does go thump in the night, do I have a dedicated green screen lab? Do I have people dedicated to fixing it within 24 hours like all third-party providers are going to do because that's their business? And then you get in line for the capital request, which could easily be years for approval of I need this money to make this improvement to make it actually do what it's supposed to do. It's an upside down model that a lot of companies attempt to do this, and particularly for something, JT, that is white hot sexy, is computer vision. And it's not just, as you well know, in the silo of active shooters. It's every use case you can think of in the industry. If I were a major retailer and you're the top sales cat at ZeroEyes, tell me why. What's the benefit of me going with you or me doing it myself? And I might have just given you the answers to that question. But what, number one, have you ever been challenged with that? The company say, well, shit, I can do that. What's your response?
Yeah, I mean, I think for all the reasons I laid out, it's going to be a very uphill battle the entire time. Could somebody do it that has very deep pockets and wants to throw a ton of R&D work at this and build the algorithm and staff it and train it and really go after that? I'm sure you could. But generally, we see that it's a fleeting thought in the minds of senior leaders in these types of large companies, right? It's something that pops on the radar and then it gets, sent off to a staff person to go work on. And then it works its way and trickles its way down into the bowels of the organization and probably doesn't get done. And we've seen that happen with several major organizations that are out there. And they generally come back and we'll say, hey, let's do another evaluation. And they'll look at it and make another determination. Hey, I think we might be able to do this ourselves. And we kind of go through this round robin cycle. It's expensive at the end of the day. When you look at what are you applying your resources towards that's already out there for something else. And then the time that you throw into that as well, the time that you are still incurring that risk by not having the right solution. And if you say, hey, yes, I'm going to build it ourselves, you have to be prepared to be liable for its performance as well. And you have to be liable for
Great point.
Of how good is this and how well is it being operated and staffed. To your point about having to staff in the retail world, and whether you have somebody that's a loss prevention person that's sitting in the back room at a retail store in Walmart, they have a million other tasks that they're doing other than watching the cameras, right? They're doing other things throughout their day. So you have to be prepared to bring on the additional employees just to do this job and to do it well. And that's one thing that we found as well as clients that ask, well, hey, look, can we just even do the monitoring ourselves?
Yep.
Come up to the ZeroEyes Operations Center and look at what these guys are doing 24/7, 365, and tell me you want to do this yourself. It is a hard job. It is a stressful job, and you got to have the right person that wants to do this sitting in those seats. I always go back to my time in the military. I was did 2 trips to Iraq, 1 to Afghanistan, and the entire time we were over there, we were looking for bad guys and trying to drop bombs on them. And our job during that time, using these large drones, the MQ-9, the Predators, the Reapers, you had 4 people looking at that one video feed to try to determine the red truck problem that's crossing the border from one nation state to another to go do bad things. And then we wanted to try to find that. So when you think about 4 people watching one camera, the amount of resources that we applied as the DoD to that, try to extrapolate that out to hundreds per store. And it's impossible. There's no way to do it. And that's why video analytics, computer vision is so important, as well as being able to provide the human in the loop component to verify all of that. Because the worst thing that you could do is send that alert, escalated response, and somebody gets hurt or killed because of an escalated response that never needed to be escalated.
Yeah, it's a great point. The self-monitoring, and I know you probably have clients that chose to do that. And some retailers, one I'm really familiar with, have very sophisticated emergency operations centers to the point where federal agencies go and tour it because it's so impressive. And it's no secret, Walmart just moved to a new 350-acre campus, more than a dozen separate office buildings, umpteen parking. It's beautiful. Knocked it out of the park. And so they have a very sophisticated emergency operations center, not unlike many other retailers. And I'm glad you mentioned the self-monitoring, because while they are great people, obviously staffing these emergency operations centers or whatever they call it at retail, they're probably not they're probably not all veterans or emergency services caliber people. And in some cases, to your point, I think you made a point earlier that the ramping up of the staffing and down of the staffing. So there's a minimum band, usually of other divisions, that you're on a duty roster essentially. And it's like, hey, merchandising, you have to go staff the EOC with somebody from, this week, 08 to 1700. So you're not getting people that are immensely familiar with what may potentially happen within that facility and be able to react accordingly. So I always call into question anybody that wants to entertain this and say, well, we can self-monitor. We've got, our own EOC. We can do all this stuff. I'm like, do you really? It's minimal staffing until shit happens, and they can react quickly. I'm not saying, they're flat on their ass, but because when a hurricane's coming, when a tornado's coming, you can kind of get ahead of that, but you can't get ahead of stuff like this that happens, a bombing or IED in the parking lot or an active shooter or something like that. And then it's go time immediately. So appreciate you mentioning that, this self-monitoring, because that can be a challenge. Without going into anything confidential, because I know you won't, what's on the roadmap for you guys in the next, say 5 years? What else is on the roadmap for ZeroEyes as a company? What are your targets?
Yeah. So again, ZeroEyes was born to do one thing really, really well, and it's detect brandished firearms under existing cameras. Yep. That's what we do today. We detect guns every single day. We take guns off the street and we arrest people or contribute to law enforcement arrests and that process to take bad actors off the streets. But what we found is through the ever evolving landscape and more as technology develops and things that can very closely align with what we do already, we need to take that into account. So after we raised our Series B last summer, we built out our product team. So our original CTO, Tim Solzer, he moved over to be our chief product officer and really stand up the vision for what is ZeroEyes 2030, right? And how do we get there? And so what we see ourselves as is the real-time threat alerting platform of the future, and that's an end-to-end solution that allows our customers the peace of mind that ZeroEyes is watching, that we're verifying, and that we're alerting you of potential threats. One of the things that's coming that I can talk about today very openly, and we're already talking to our clients about, is bladed object detection. For a long time, knives or machetes or swords have been a very, very hard object to detect underneath of the camera. But the advancements in computer vision over the last few years have enabled us to start looking more deeply at that and looking at pixel density requirements and things that allow us to see smaller objects. And what we found is we're at a point now where we can do this, and we think we can do it very well. So we've got limited capacity right now, but it's rolling out, and we expect that to be sometime in spring of 2026 to be the next iteration of ZeroEyes for that threat alerting. In addition to that, things along the lines of working with industry leaders like Rapid SOS, and just saw Axon with their acquisition of Carbine, being able to do these next generation 911 geolocations to really hone in on where are these alerts happening at. Well, if one of our cameras, one of the ZeroEyes enabled cameras, picks up a threat, whether it's a knife or a gun, we can send that over to and correlate that with a next generation 911 software that says, well, there was a 911 call that came in on this side of the building, but this is where it got picked up at. And we can say, well, this is probably the direction of travel. And so those things are, we're exploring very heavily into. And so our company has the vision of build, buy, or partner with. And we're evaluating a ton of different companies, a ton of different people to see how we can really blow the doors off of this thing and make ZeroEyes that real-time threat alerting platform of the future.
Yeah, the knives, in my experience, weapons, obviously a bigger problem overseas because, the few times I'm overseas, I'll be there 2 weeks in London on unrelated but business. In Germany, and then I'll be there again in February. I casually talk about things like this that are in the market, and the conversations generally go, and they'll laugh and say, "Well, that's an American problem. Our problem is knives. People getting the shit stabbed out of them on the bridge, on the street corner, or coming out of a pub and getting knifed." So that's encouraging to hear. In all of the scope, are you penetrated overseas, or are you largely US, or what's the portfolio look like right now?
Yeah, so that's something that we're focusing on in 2026 is international expansion. We do have a handful of clients in the Caribbean, down in Mexico. We have another large client that's headquartered out of the UK that has different facilities both here in the United States as well as in the UK. And so that's part of our growth targets for the future. We partnered with an organization out in the MENA market to be able to open that space up as well. So these are things, international expansion is coming for ZeroEyes.
Good. All right. Last question is a free one for you. Anything you'd like to add? This has been awesome. And I got to believe my phone's already buzzing. I got to believe there'll be more questions, and hopefully we've shed light on being able to separate what's in the media from reality and actually who ZeroEyes is. So open mic for you, bud. Anything you'd like to close out with, JT?
Yeah, I think it's just take a demo, talk to our people, see the ZeroEyes difference, and beyond the software, beyond the operations center, meet with our people. And that should tell you enough right there. When you sit down with a ZeroEyes employee, whether an account executive on the sales side of the house, our technical sales engineers that are going to walk you through how to implement this thing, to our installers when you make the decision to bring us on board, This is a white glove service from end to end, and we pride ourselves on that. That experience is very, very important because what we're doing here is quite literally the difference between life and death in many scenarios. And so, if you don't take that white glove approach, you're inducing risk and you're creating a problem for the client later on. And so we want to mitigate that to the best of our ability by treating our clients the best that we can, give them the best possible service, being available for them 24/7, 365. So yeah, I think, at the end of the day, I just encourage people, I would fly up, I will be at our office to sit down, show you the operations center. We encourage folks to do tours, come in and look at it, come check out what we do on a day-to-day basis. And I guarantee you'll be blown away.
Yeah, it's I use my own example jokingly with Sam when I came up, and he completely changed my mind within probably 30 minutes of meeting with him because I have the subject matter expertise of the risk in retail and all the things that are eventually going to happen. But to your point of, get a demo, fly up there, look at it, do the deep dive and see what's really behind the curtain. And it was revealing to me everything. And that, dude, that was, gosh, I can't even remember. It was probably 19 or 20, maybe, is when I came up. And it was a very educational moment for me. And I'm like, okay, now I get it. I get it. So for those retailers that are out there and you've been in the saddle 20 years and you think you get it, I would encourage you to open your mind and get on the phone with these guys or go up there and understand what right looks like. Because you guys, in my estimation, are the industry standard for a reason. So greatly appreciate your time this morning, JT. I'm assuming you're on LinkedIn. People can find you and get a hold of you. Otherwise, the ZeroEyes website. How would somebody find you guys?
Yeah, if you go to ZeroEyes.com, you can find me on LinkedIn, James JT Wilkins. My email is jt@ZeroEyes.com. I'm happy to talk to anybody about this.
Okay. All right, dude. Thanks a million. Appreciate your time, and we'll talk soon. Have a good one.
All right, Brandon. Thank you.
Thank you.